part 2 of our look at the life and films of Auteur filmmaker Nicolas Winding Refn. After Refn's triumphant return to Denmark in the world of Pusher, he was given the green light from his producers to make the third and final installment of the Pusher films. Following the pattern that he had established with Pusher 2, Pusher 3 focuses on a minor but memorable character from the previous films, the Serbian kingpin Milo. Pusher 3 documents a nightmarish 24 hours in the recovering addict's life that sees him trying to balance commitments to Narcotics Anonymous, his daughter's wedding banquet, and his rapidly unraveling business ventures with various drug traffickers.
Litt for hodet. Så
Cisada.
Kim duga da ga hub kontrola.
Nu tar bira mali prap mig så där.
Kan du bara komma tillbaka med pillen? Den är ju hos mig.
Zlatko Budic gives a wonderfully layered performance as Milo, a warm and eminently sympathetic hero with a weakness for smoking heroin and a willingness to cross deep into the dark side when the situation requires. The film also has a slew of minor characters from the other films making cameo appearances, including Kurt Nielsen, Livino Jensen, and in a nice touch, Slavko Labovic as Radovan, whom Milo coaxes out of retirement for one last favor. Pusher 3 is perhaps the best of the trilogy at achieving Refn's goal of showing the banality of the criminal lifestyle, going into great detail with the kind of tiresome everyday chores the lifestyle requires that could hardly be considered glamorous. The fact that this banality extends even into Milo's more grisly tasks provides a horrific layer of complexity both to Milo and to Refn's ultimate statement about the criminal lifestyle. These are just normal people who happen to have a really, really terrible job. Mainstream Danish critics received Pusher 3 with hostility. While the grisly finale certainly had something to do with the backlash, Refn claims that it is mostly because of a cultural hostility towards the immigrants that he focused the film on. Serbian, Armenian, and Arab gangsters dominate the film and speak mostly in their own languages, which Refn contends alienates mainstream Danish audiences. Despite the critical backlash against Pusher 3, the two new Pusher films were a greater artistic and financial success than Refn could have hoped for. He was now out of debt and on the path to earning the cultural capital that he desired. Still, the experience was bittersweet. The negative critical reaction to Pusher 3 in the Danish press affected him, and he once again made a vow that he would never make another film in Denmark, a vow that he has yet to break.
Jeg er træt her, men nu er det overstået. Godt, nu er det overstået.
In 2006, North American distributor Magnolia picked up the Pusher trilogy for a limited theatrical release, and more importantly, the distribution of the Pusher films on Region 1 DVD, which for many people was their first introduction to Refn's films. At the same time his work was gaining traction in North America, Nicolas was in the United Kingdom trying to get another English-language project in motion. He soon took a director-for-hire job that seems bafflingly out of character for him, a feature-length TV movie adaptation of an Agatha Christie novel called Miss Marple, Nemesis, for the British ITV network. Going from cocaine and heroin-fueled psychopaths to tea and crumpets with a geriatric detective is a shocking transition, but it allowed the just-out-of-debt Refn to generate some quick money for his family and inspire confidence in UK investors, even if the episode itself lacks any overt indication that Refn directed it, other than his name.
Powdered eggs! Powdered eggs! Powdered eggs! Somebody had to do it.
The Miss Marple episode also gave Refn the chance to meet UK-based editor Matt Newman, in whom he found an aesthetic soulmate and would go on to edit his next 4 films.
I don't think the poison was in the champagne.
After Miss Marple, Refn began looking for more serious projects to work on. Rupert Preston, the distributor of the Pusher films in the United Kingdom, sent Refn a script that caught his eye. It was a biopic of Britain's most notorious prisoner, Michael Peterson, also known as Charlie Bronson, who, after being sentenced to 7 years in prison for stealing £26 from a post office, began a series of prison brawls, riots, and hostage threats that added years to his sentence, serving most of them in solitary confinement.
26 years. 26 years of solitary I've done, and I ain't killed no one!
Charlie Bronson has gathered a cult following in Britain of people who see his incarceration as unjust. Refn liked certain aspects of the script, but found that it was too conventional for his taste, and he passed on it. Eventually, though, the script became a springboard for an idea that he found even more interesting, himself. Refn agreed to do the film, but on the condition that he could rewrite it. Refn claims that he has no real interest in Charlie Bronson, but what was interesting to him was how the man transformed himself into a celebrity. While large doses of autobiography are in every one of his films, his rewrites for Bronson turned the script from a conventional biopic into Refn's most personal film to date. Though he claims in recent interviews that he is not a violent person, Refn has nonetheless admitted to frequent violent outbursts in his past. The first was at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, an acting school that Refn either dropped out of or was expelled from for throwing a desk across the room in a fit. While directing the original Pusher, Refn admits to throwing a walkie-talkie at a production assistant who was trying to wrap up filming before he had finished shooting an important scene, apparently hitting her in the head with the object. He also has confessed to coming to blows with collaborators on multiple occasions, most recently with actor Harrison Ford over creative differences on Paul Schrader's script for The Dying of the Light that Refn was attached to direct. It is no surprise then that Refn's most autobiographical film is about a man whose violent outbursts and offbeat artistic sensibilities transform him into a star. Refn even uses Bronson to relive the desk-throwing incident from his youth. Actor Tom Hardy had been attached to the Bronson project from early on, but Refn was hesitant to cast him because of a terrible first meeting with the actor in a wine bar where they failed to hit it off. As Refn struggled to find a replacement, his producers convinced him to meet with Hardy one last time, and this time the meeting went much better, and they began shooting. Hardy has had a lifelong fascination with Bronson, which gives his performance a meticulous sense for detail and accuracy, which Refn decided was necessary to counter his own deficiency of interest. Hardy also was able to achieve an uncanny physical resemblance to Bronson. Refn treads into new visual territory with Bronson, as he did with Fear X, by abandoning the handheld documentary feel of the Pusher films and embracing a super stylized look that dives into different layers of reality and consciousness. Refn's use of synth-pop music in the film was also a portent of things to come, especially a song by contemporary electronic musician Johnny Jewel. The colorblind Refn no doubt found something to like in the song's lyrical content. Bronson is more a series of incidents strung together than a typical biopic. In fact, the film doesn't seem concerned with establishing and maintaining the sense of linear time that you would expect to find in a biopic. I can imagine that serving time in prison, especially solitary confinement as Bronson had, has a way of disjointing a person's sense of linear time, and Bronson's lack of traditional biopic structure effectively gives an impression of what that disorientation might feel like. Despite Tom Hardy's raw masculinity that dominates the picture, Refn insists that Bronson is a feminine film that shows a misfit's journey to becoming a famous artist, a journey based as much on his own life as Michael Peterson's.
What is it you want now?
Music.
Bronson hit the festival circuit in 2008 and received positive reviews, many critics comparing the film favorably to Kubrick's adaptation of A Clockwork Orange, and praising Tom Hardy's intense and humorous performance.
Not there on a fucking cars, you cunts!
The role proved to be a star-making one for Hardy, who was soon cast in a couple of the biggest films in recent memory.
Mr. Wayne.
The critical success of Bronson gave Refn a new level of credibility, yet he didn't use it to propel him into the mainstream quite yet. The next year he embarked on what would be his most experimental project, a long-dreamed-about Viking movie that had been developing in his consciousness since he was a teenager. Refn re-teamed with director of photography Morten Søborg, actor Mads Mikkelsen, and musician Peter and went into the remote areas of Scotland to find Valhalla Rising. Valhalla Rising has roots in genre filmmaking, but like all of Refn's films, takes a decidedly revisionist approach. The Vikings themselves are far from the idealized warriors depicted in traditional genre films. In Valhalla Rising, they are a filthy and dismal lot of refugees fleeing Christian oppression, entertaining themselves on the roadside with brutal death matches. Mads Mikkelsen plays One Eye, a mute without a past, and the most dangerous of the slave warriors. He escapes his captors and joins a band of would-be Christian crusaders who want to travel to Jerusalem on vague promises of wealth.
One Eye. I could use a good fighter like you. You're God's own soldier's warrior.
But end up taking a wrong turn somewhere along the way, leading them to the New World. To Refn, Valhalla Rising is a science fiction film, one that sees our miserable heroes leaving their solar system into uncharted territory. And the disorienting boat journey that is the centerpiece of the film might be compared to Dave's trek down the rabbit hole in 2001. The film's cinematography and post-processing are stunningly realized and have no easy comparative analog, perhaps best described as a digital reinterpretation of Tarkovsky's films. Yet the digital nature of Valhalla Rising's images in no way compromises the credibility of the ancient time period it is set in. In fact, the crystal-clear imagery seems to exist without prior knowledge of cinema, as if it was memory plucked from some primeval and unknowable consciousness. Valhalla Rising was Refn's most experimental film since Fear X, and like Fear X, polarized critics and audiences. Many people expecting a traditional Viking film, as the marketing note implied, were left wanting. But Valhalla Rising remains filmmaking at its most generous, and it rewards patient and curious inquiry. Because of its super low budget and lack of creature comforts for the cast and crew, as well as Nicolas's insistence on shooting in only the most remote and untouched areas of Scotland, it was an endurance test of a production for all involved, which was well documented by director's assistant Saskia Pomeroy in a series of candid YouTube videos that show Refn in some frank moments.
Oh. 6? Come on. I'll go up back to the apartment, make some coffee and stuff. Yeah? Well, you can't go back to sleep.
No.
Typical of Refn, after the production of Valhalla Rising, he was now in the mood to do something completely different. He was finally ready to come to Hollywood to see if he could get a project going, and started taking meetings a few days a week in town, and then flying back to Europe to be with his newborn daughter. Ryan Gosling, who was quickly becoming Hollywood's hottest young actor, learned that Refn was in town looking for a project, and Gosling, who had seen and loved Bronson, wanted a chance to work with him. Refn agreed to meet with him to discuss an adapted screenplay by writer Hossein Amini called Drive that had been in development for 6 years at Universal. Gosling then watched the rest of Refn's films and became convinced that Refn should become, as he puts it, his dude. Refn explains the details of their meeting thusly.
Halfway through the dinner, I asked him to take me home because I had used to lie down. So it kind of was concluding a lot of blind date gone terribly wrong. And on the way home, we were driving to Santa Monica on the freeway where I was staying in a hotel, which is quite a long drive from where we were. There was this awkward silence, and Ryan puts on the radio, and it's REO Speedwagons, and it's a great pop song of the 80s, and I start to get very emotional. I start singing to the song, which is very annoying when people do that. And then I get some kind of emotional kind of breakdown, and I start to cry in front of him, and tears are rolling down my cheek in front of myself and Ryan here in this car as we're driving on the freeway, and I'm sitting with this song, and a lot of it had to do with that I missed my family and my kids, and my career was over, and everything was just terrible, and what am I doing here, and all those terrible existentialistic things. But it gave me a vision for a movie, and I turned to Ryan and I said, I know what we're going to make. We're going to make a movie about a man who drives around in a car at night listening to pop music, because that's emotional relief. And that is when Ryan turned to me and said, I'm in.
Refn now had his next project and the star power to make it happen, but he quickly ran into a major problem. Universal suddenly dropped the film, and no other studio was willing to pick it up. Luckily, Refn's hard-won knowledge of the independent world of film finance kept the project alive. He went to the Cannes Film Festival in 2010 and used his European contact to secure initial financing for Drive, which quickly led to the worldwide rights being snapped up. That Drive was saved in the cinematic mecca that is Cannes would prove to be a delicious irony for Refn a year later. Although modest by Hollywood standards, he now had by far the biggest budget that he had ever had to work with, $10 million, and more importantly, a shield from investor interference thanks to the work of producer Mark Platt and the star power of Ryan Gosling, who both understood that giving Refn the creative freedom to make the film he wanted to make would be beneficial for all involved. Refn wanted Drive to have the look of Kenneth Anger's underground films, so he chose director of photography Newton Thomas Siegel, whose first film was Anger's Lucifer Rising. Siegel also had a wealth of experience shooting movies with the latest HD video cameras, and shot Drive with the now ubiquitous Arri Alexa HD camera.
Hey kid, give us a hand here for a second.
Ryan Gosling plays the unnamed hero of the film, a stuntman who spends his evenings as a getaway driver. Driver soon gets involved with his neighbor Irene and her son Benicio after her car breaks down. They soon develop feelings for one another, expressed in a series of quiet glances.
I'm not doing anything this weekend. If you want to ride or something.
But when Irene's convict husband returns home from a brief stint in prison, Driver volunteers to help him to settle an old debt in order to keep the mafia away from Irene and Benicio. Things go dreadfully awry, as they have the tendency to do, which forces Driver onto a path of violence that he can never return from. Many have compared Gosling's near-mute character with the cool and capable masculinity of Steve McQueen, but Driver actually has more in common with the awkward and autistic film clerk Lenny from Bleeder. In fact, Drive is a throwback to Refn's sophomore film in several ways. Like Bleeder, Drive is a film of razor-sharp contrast between the innocent and the ugly. Like all of Refn's films, Drive is most interesting where it willfully breaks from genre conventions to create unexpected drama and emotions. Driver, like Lenny from Bleeder, is more of a passive character than a proactive one, which is one of the cardinal sins in Hollywood filmmaking, especially for a film rooted in the action genre, but Refn's direction and Gosling's fascinating performance make it work. And Refn's not just content to blend the rules of genre with his hero alone, but also with the supporting characters. He worked closely with each of his actors to add history and depth to their characters that in normal genre films would have remained frustratingly static. When Standard Gabriel, played with poise by Oscar Isaac, returns from prison to interrupt the romance between Driver and Irene, one would expect there to be some sort of conflict between Driver and the ex-con, but it never happens. In fact, Driver seems to accept his return without protest, and Standard reveals himself to be a self-effacing and decent man who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
We're here celebrating, but it's a shameful thing, what I did. And I have a lot of making up to do to everyone. But second chances are rare, right? And that's worth celebrating, right?
The heavies of Drive, played by Albert Brooks and Ron Perlman, in the excellent casting typical of Refn, are also given depth and dimension that is atypical of Hollywood genre films. With Brooks's Bernie Rose, a gangster with a past as a movie producer, Refn explores the anxieties associated with the role that Hollywood producers play in the filmmaking process, which can be negative for directors with unique visions. Bernie's use of knives that come out and cut when people least expect them is not a coincidence.
Don't worry. Don't worry. That's it. It's done. There's no pain. It's over. It's over.
With Irene, played by Carey Mulligan, who Refn casts within moments of meeting her, Refn makes up for his history of somewhat two-dimensional female characters. Mulligan brings a shy, quiet grace to her character, one whose innocence appears to be slightly burdened by the weight of the world. That she is afforded sense enough to run when Driver starts stomping people's heads in is a testament to the care that went into giving her a life and mind of her own, and not beholden to the Hollywood demand for contrived and sappy endings. With Drive, Refn achieved a near-perfect blend of art house and genre, masculine power and feminine grace. And with its final shot, Refn pays homage to the film that it owes most to, a heartfelt cinematic tip of the hat to the master. Drive premiered on May 20th, 2011 at cinema's most prestigious film festival in Cannes, the very place that he fought to save the film from disaster a year earlier. After the screening, the audience rose and gave Refn a standing ovation, captured here by an audience member's cell phone. Despite the controversy stoked by Danish compatriot Lars von Trier, Cannes was a triumph for Refn as he took home the award for Best Director.
Le prix de la mise en scène est remis à Nicolas Winding Refn pour Drive. Je tiens à remercier ma mère qui, toute ma vie depuis ma naissance, m'a assuré que j'étais un génie, quoi que je fasse.
Drive would go on to win another 40 awards. The Danish Film Institute even acknowledged the success of their prodigal son by honoring Drive with the Best American Film Award. The film was also a modest box office success and cemented Refn's reputation as an in-demand director who actors want to work with. Rumors about his next project began swirling around Hollywood. Would it be Wonder Woman with Christina Hendricks? A Barbarella TV series? Refn's biggest post-Drive project is him being attached to direct a big-budget studio remake of the 1976 science fiction film Logan's Run for Warner Brothers.
Through a world beyond imagination.
In the meantime, though, He has shot and is now in post-production with the low-budget film Only God Forgives, starring Ryan Gosling. The film is described as a western set in Thailand, and it is scheduled for release sometime in 2013. The journey of auteur filmmaker Nicolas Winding Refn, from the young and precocious enfant terrible of Danish cinema to actor's director and Hollywood player, is one that demonstrates both the risks and rewards inherent in striving to stay true to one's unique artistic voice, which Refn has stubbornly managed to cling to over his 15-year career, making films as diverse as they are unmistakably his own. I cannot help but speculate, though, if he begins to assimilate to Hollywood's way of doing things as his career progresses, what place his very specific voice will have in films with increasingly large budgets. Still, even if something is lost in Refn's translation into big-budget filmmaking, I think there will always be a desire in him to continue to make films that are true to his roots. Tough, uncompromising, low-budget, revisionist genre films of tremendous sympathy, honesty, and human insight.
It's like a graveyard. Only God Forgives is about a police lieutenant in Thailand who believes he's God, and an American who's looking for a religion to believe in.